future of our world is frail and grey. With a few exceptions, many states in the world are grappling with an aging population and childless cities. After the pandemic hit, major economies in the world expected young couples to start families and expand their country's workforce. Let's just say that plan went down the drain. As it stands today, countries like China are reeling from immense loss in population. How did we get here? In this video, we're breaking down how leading economies are adapting to an aging population, why young couples refuse to start families, and why the US is battling with a population standstill crisis of its own. Before we start, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Let's get started. On May 1st, 2023, more than 500,000 French citizens marched and protested on the streets of Paris to resist President Macron's pension reforms. The country saw one of the largest demonstrations of all time as the government proceeded to pass a controversial bill on increasing the retirement age from 62 to 64. Then back in June 2023, France saw another massive wave of protests by the citizens as well as union leaders as the bill came into action. President Macron's government passed the bill anyway. France's resistance movement against higher retirement age tells us two incredibly important things as the world's aging population rises. Number one, the governments want to cut pension budgets. And second, the world has stopped having babies. President Macron's argument for increasing the retirement age was to cut back the country's colossal spending on pensions and retirement benefits. It's true that governments worldwide are grappling with slow post-COVID economies, but it is the old and elderly who are struggling with new policy changes like France. Even though Macron's centrist government didn't have a voting majority in the National Assembly, it rallied with the conservative opposition bloc to pass the bill. The left-wing voices in France are calling out the government for ignoring reforms, like taxing the wealthy in favor of increasing the retirement age. And, well, France isn't alone in making such radical reforms. As the world's population becomes more and more grey, around the world, many centrist and conservative governments are pushing to defund free healthcare incentives and social welfare initiatives as one sector of the population loses its capacity to work. The issue in hand is simple. As the grey faction stops adding to the GDP after a certain age, why would the government spend a dime on them? That argument doesn't hold weight if you consider how the grey population has consistently contributed to the GDP during their work life. However, the problem of the greying population is becoming a major policy issue. The United Nations expects that by 2050, the world population consisting of oldest old, aged 80 years and above, will triple to 430 million, and that number should worry you. This is not to say that the governments aren't taking note of such alarming statistics, but instead of funding welfare programs to help the elderly, the governments are incentivizing them to rejoin the workforce. One of the most notable examples of this phenomenon is the UK, which recently waived off income tax brackets to keep their older, skilled people in the labour market. At the same time, the government is also investing in childcare support to make use of stay-at-home folks or grandparents. Yet none of these measures address the problem at large. People have essentially stopped having babies. The issue at hand isn't just about spending taxpayer money on the elderly, it's about the diminishing workforce that is losing further integration. So, what's going on? We might as well be living in a dystopian reality. After decades of restrictive family planning and child policies, China's population is rapidly shrinking. In fact, it is predicted that by 2080, the country's population will be less than 1 billion. In the process, India is one step closer to claiming the title of the biggest population in the world. The problem with a shrinking population isn't just exclusive to China. Countries like Japan, the US, South Korea, Russia, Germany, Spain, and more are also seeing a downward spiral. However, China's struggles with an aging population help us understand why people aren't interested in starting families. After World War II, the boom in population was attributed to larger life expectancy and access to healthcare and medical innovation. Today, the problem with a shrinking population seems to be more ideological than ever, with larger discourses over women's bodily autonomy, right to work, and access to contraceptives. The focus on starting families is losing its importance. As the trends in societal expectations change, women aren't interested in helping the states maintain their large workforces. And of course, the focus on women's right to work is just one side of the coin. The problem is that they just don't want to bring children into an uncertain, economically turbulent world. Look at China, for instance. Young couples aren't bound by state-controlled family planning initiatives, but they still refuse to reproduce because of rising inflation and stagnant wages. The CCP now encourages couples to have 3 children instead of 1, but the problem remains. People simply can't afford to have children. At the same time, childcare facilities and daycare infrastructures are either unsafe or they're very expensive. On the issue of China's shrinking population, CNN reported, high living and education costs and skyrocketing property prices are major factors. Many people, especially in cities, face stagnating wages, fewer job opportunities, and grueling work hours that make it both difficult and expensive to raise 1 child, let alone 3. It is not shocking that in 2022, China's fertility rate dropped to a record low of 1.09. The statistic was so disturbing that the ever-secretive state media of the country was forced to report it. It doesn't take a genius to see that the CCP is desperately trying to push their citizens to have babies. However, the drop in fertility rates suggests that women also do not have supporting structures to start a family. In emerging economies like China, the weak legislation on paid maternity or paternity leave and discrimination against mothers is another issue. Such hurdles don't seem to outweigh the benefits of having children. In countries like China, people don't care about tax cuts, inexpensive schooling, and cash incentives. Not to mention, there's another structural reason why young couples don't have the mobility to start a family. They're busy taking care of their aging parents and other family members. At large, millennials and Gen Z are trapped with minimal disposable incomes, and most of their resources are going to support their old parents or grandparents. The CCP isn't blind to these systematic problems, yet the progress is painstakingly slow. Xi Jinping has taken a central role in revitalizing the country's declining population and expanding its workforce. In his own words, "We will pursue a proactive national strategy in response to population aging, develop elderly care programs and services, and provide better services for elderly people who live alone." In the meanwhile, China will continue to struggle with a declining population as young couples focus on buying expensive properties instead of footing maternity bills. So far, we have looked into the developing world and its reasons to steer away from starting a family. Yet population shrinkage isn't just a global South problem. Most notably, America's working class population has been standing still for a decade. And in 2022, the country saw only 0.4% growth in its resident boom. Yep, Biden has a problem too. Here's the thing. Most left-wing climate activists have cited the shrinking population as a push for better resource management. For them, fewer babies means the world is healing. On the other hand, a stagnant population means a stagnant economy that the US can't afford. The country's recent turmoil with COVID-19 lost them 1 million people in the blink of an eye. Yet experts believe that America's battle with a shrinking population would have happened in the absence of a pandemic too. You see, the developed world is struggling with population shrinkage for all reasons that seem relevant to China only. The truth is, the unprecedented economic crisis, inflation, and bad corporate practices discourage women from having children in the West too. But in the case of North America, the aging population can also be credited to restrictive immigration policies. You see, other than increasing fertility rates, a country's quick fix to expand its population and workforce is immigration, a policy area that President Trump changed radically. Both legal and illegal immigration were halted in the US from 2016 to 2020. Immigrants from the Middle East and Latin America crossed America from their safe haven lists as the Trump administration blacklisted the majority. So far, President Biden hasn't prioritized normalizing immigration policies either. Ever since the US has closed its doors on immigrants, the country's future has gone noticeably bleak. Economists cite immigration as the biggest source of talent accumulation in the US, and most technology-based areas, as well as startups, are suffering immensely. So far, the government's response has been shockingly ignorant. At this rate, America's future is dark and childless. Found this video insightful? Subscribe to our channel.